Until now, all of the derivatives that you've been taking have just been of a single term. However, today we're going to learn how to take the derivative when you have a product of terms or when you have a quotient of terms. So these are called the product rule and the quotient rule. So the product rule, you can see this right here means the derivative of f times g, by the way. That's what that d dx is that's the derivative. It's a new notation, but it's really, really useful when you are working with things like this. So the derivative of f times g is going to be equal to your first function f times the derivative of your second function g plus your second function g times the derivative of your first function f. I usually like to, I think that this is not a very friendly way to look at it. So I usually call f the first, g the second, and I'll just write it as the first times the second prime, or derivative of the second, plus the second times the derivative of the first. So you can remember it however you want to. Keep in mind that our f is the first and the g is the second. So I think that for me personally, remembering it this way right here, I've actually remembered it that way probably for the last 20 years or so. So I think that that's it's effective for me. You can use either way though. So let's do a few examples. So for this problem, I gave you an interesting one where there's actually two ways to do it. So just a little note, you actually can distribute this first, and then you can take the derivative from there. I'm going to show you how to do it using the product rule. You might be like, why are we doing this? It's a lot longer than distributing first. The reason I'm doing it is because I'm hoping that you might go back and actually check your answer using the shorter way. So we're going to be finding h prime of x. This thing right here, x squared, I'm going to call that my first, or you can call it, based on the formula above, your f of x. This thing right here, the 2x minus 2, this is my second thing, or if you want, you can call that your g of x. So remember, we're going to do our first term, x squared, or f of x, times the derivative of the second term. The derivative of 2x minus 2 is going to be 2 minus 0, or just 2, plus the second term, which is 2x minus 2, times the derivative of the first, which is going to give me 2x. So from there, you can simplify this all out. You will end up getting 6x squared minus 4x. And so this is the way to do it using the product rule. If you wanted to do it then without the product rule, I will show you how you can also do that. So this is method 2. You would have to start by distributing this, and you would end up getting 6x squared minus 4x, which is the same thing that we just got. So keep in mind that sometimes it's faster to distribute. However, there are going to be cases where you can't actually use the distributive property and you're going to have to use the product rule. So I'll show you one of those in just a second. So for number 2, we actually have to use the product rule. There is no shortcut for this one. So I'm going to call this 3x cubed my first term, or you can call it your f of x. E to the x is my second term. So using the product rule, we get that the derivative of h prime of x, is going to be equal to my first term, which is 3x cubed, times the derivative of the second, which is e to the x, plus my second term, which again is e to the x, times the derivative of the first term, which is 9x squared. Be really careful on this, actually. it's a really common thing that people just write 9e to the x times x squared as their answer, and they miss that entire first part. So make sure that if you have a product, you're using the product rule. That's really important. So my second thing is the quotient rule. And you can call these numerator and denominator. I just call this the top of the fraction, the bottom of the fraction. Makes it easier to remember for me personally. But you'll find that there's a lot of ways to remember it. I'll actually give you a second way. So first of all, you're going to do the bottom one, which is g of x, times the derivative of the top, so f prime of x, minus the top thing, f of x, times the derivative of the bottom part of the fraction, g of x. Then in the denominator, you're going to have g of x squared. We don't take the derivative of that bottom part. So my way to remember it with words is like this. Bottom times the derivative of the top minus top times the derivative of the bottom all over the bottom of the fraction squared. Another way that I have heard people remember it, so the way I just showed you is the way that I've been remembering it since high school. Another way that I think works for some people is they say low d high minus high d low over the square of what's below. So I'll write that out if you want to use that to remember it. So you can use any way that you want to remember it. I am going to tell you that you probably are going to eventually need to memorize this, however. So any of these three methods that I wrote out is a good way to remember it. This is one of the few things in calculus that you just have to straight up memorize. There's no easy way to... Actually, there is an easy way. There is a hard way to get around it. So I will tell you a little story on this. I actually never memorized this in AP Calculus when I was in high school. I didn't actually learn it until college because I found a workaround that involved the product rule and something that we learned later on called the chain rule. So once you learn the chain rule, if you want to figure out a way to do this, you can. Not recommended, but that's just a side note for this. So we're going to start by finding the derivative of this function right here. I'm going to write it as y prime, since I have y equals. So the first thing I think that you should always look for if you have a fraction is see if there's anything that can be simplified. Unfortunately, there is nothing here to simplify, so you are kind of stuck doing this a long way. So we are going to do our... if you want, you can think of this as f of x. You can think of this as the high thing. And then you can think of this as the top. I don't really care which one. I would say choose a method to remember and stick with it. This is the g of x. It's the low or the bottom. So whichever method you decide that you want to use, you can go from there. So I'm going to start by doing the bottom of the fraction times the derivative of the top of the fraction. Derivative of my numerator is 5 minus my top fraction, 5x minus my top function, 5x minus 2, times the derivative of the bottom. Derivative of x squared plus 1 is 2x. This is going to be all over x squared plus 1 squared. So for the denominator, I actually recommend not simplifying that. I think that it will make your life easier in the long run if you don't multiply out stuff like that. However, the numerator you're probably going to want to simplify a little bit just because it's being subtracted. So let's go ahead and do that. So this actually ends up being my answer for this one. It's not pleasant. Occasionally you get something that simplifies out and you can cancel out something with the denominator. This is not one of those cases, so we're just going to leave this like that. So here's another one, kind of an unpleasant one. I am going to say that h and t are used frequently in calculus, or actually if you take physics in the future, you'll probably see these used if you take a calculus-based physics especially. H is usually height, t is usually time, so those come up a lot. People don't tend to not like t because they look like pluses, so if you want to change these as to x's, you can. Just make sure that you write on the side something along the lines of I'm changing x to t, or or set x equal to t, or something like that. So let's go ahead and we'll work this out. If you want, before you do anything else, I highly recommend rewriting that 1 over t as a t to the negative 1. There are ways that you can simplify that so you don't have a fraction in the numerator. You can use one of those if you want, but you don't necessarily have to. So now we're going to find h prime of t. We're going to get the bottom, the denominator, which is t plus 5, times the derivative of the numerator. Remember, derivative of t to the negative 1 is going to be this one, it's negative t to the negative 1, so we end up getting positive t to the negative 2. That's going to be minus the numerator times the derivative of the denominator. This is all over the denominator squared. So then the last thing that you really need to do is simplify whatever you can. I don't care how you do this next part. I'm going to end up getting 1 over t plus 5 over t squared minus 3 plus 1 over t again. And the final answer, you should get something along the lines of 5 over t squared plus 2 over t minus 3 all over t plus 5 squared. So you can certainly simplify this out more. It's nice to look at something that doesn't have fractions. However, if you want to leave it like this, you will probably be fine. If it's a free response question, this is fine. If it's a multiple choice, you probably will see it in a more simplified way.